Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Daisy. For today's video, I will be reading my subscribers' spooky stories. So grab your snacks, grab your kobika, and let's get straight into it. Hi, my name is Yvel. I have a scary story for you. I had the pleasure of talking to my 98-year-old great-granduncle many years ago before he passed. I was 14 at the time, growing up in Yauco, Puerto Rico, and as is the usual interest, I asked him if he knew any old town legends from long ago. He was alive before the invention of the television and even lived a great majority of his life without the comforts of electricity and automobiles. The townspeople would pass the time by gathering around the fire and sharing ghost stories. The scary fact of the matter is one of the stories he told I actually experienced a few years prior, which is the legend I will be sharing with you. For ages, it has been said that when the sun sets over the horizon, turning the blue sky into darkness as the late night mist rolls over the hills, one should avoid wandering too far from home or going outside in the rural wilderness. Late at night, when most people are warm in their beds, ghostly howling can be heard echoing through the hills and woods. This eerie sound is not from ordinary dogs or wolves, as wolves do not exist on the island, and dogs do not howl with such mournful and ghostly tones as these spine-chilling echoes. If you hear these spine-chilling wails, whether they are near or far, know that you might be encountering los perros de las cruces, or the black hounds of the crosses. This pack of ghostly demon hounds is said to have glowing yellow and fiery eyes and drag heavy, rusted chains around their necks. They were once the faithful hounds of a shepherd who died of the bubonic plague when it ravaged the island centuries ago during the colonial period. After he was buried, the hounds were chained to trees at the edges of the cemetery as guard dogs and were never allowed off their chains. They continuously pulled and tugged, trying to reach their master, releasing mournful and unholy howls day and night without rest. This constant howling kept the neighbors of the cemetery awake all night. The situation continued until one day, when the howling suddenly stopped. The townspeople went to investigate and discovered an eerie sight. The chains were all snapped and in shambles, but the dogs were nowhere to be found. No trace, no tracks. Some believe the dogs went off to die, while others think the devil himself took them in out of pity. For many years, the howling ceased, until one fateful day. The town underwent violent expansion. To make way for progress, the bodies were exhumed and relocated to a new site high in the mountains, where they would not be disturbed. The howling started again soon after. It is said that when the bodies were moved, the hounds lost their master and now prowl the countryside every night in search of the shepherd's lost grave. They howl in pain, loss, and rabid anger, targeting those who wander alone at night. They are known to haunt graveyards, lonely dirt roads, and bridges, with some saying they attack the evil-hearted. The only trace they leave are footprints, burned into the ground or wherever they touch, reeking of incense and sometimes sulfur. To ward them off, it is said to place a stick by your door, resembling a shepherd's cane. However, do not let your guard down. If you hear those haunting howls echoing through the town of Yauco, be assured they are near, searching for their lost master and prowling in the shadows, seeking whom to devour. I did not know of this story until my great-granduncle told me, but years before, I had experienced the black hounds of the crosses myself. When I was 11, my family and I lived in a remote house deep in the woods, where the trees were so tall and dense that moonlight could barely pierce through at night. Well, one peaceful evening, I was home alone. My mother had taken my brother to basketball practice, and I stayed behind. I spent the evening doing my homework. The night was quiet. Not a single cricket could be heard, and the wind itself grew deathly still. It was all an encompassing silence that I would have described as too quiet. I felt uneasy, though I tried to distract myself from the gut feeling of something being completely off by getting back to work. As hours passed, my stomach knotted up despite my best efforts to ignore it and keep working. Eventually, I finished all my homework and planned to take a bath and go to bed, as I had school the next day and it was already 9 p.m. That's when I heard it. A howl. At first, there was just one, unearthly in tone. Then came many more. These howls were unlike any dogs or a beast I had ever heard, their echoes piercing my soul to its core. Never had I been so terrified by a sound in my life. I could hear movement outside and the rattling of rusty chains hitting the ground at high speed. Curiosity got the better of me, and despite my fear, I felt compelled to investigate. I gathered up the courage and began slowly approaching the door and carefully pried it open. There, in the shadows just beyond the light, I saw glowing yellow and a pitch black, smoky coat of fur. That is when a hound lunged violently at my door, but I managed to shut it in time. Overcome by sheer terror and shock, I snapped out of my daze, locked the door immediately, and ran as fast as I could to secure all the other doors, which, thankfully, were made out of solid steel. I quickly grabbed a bat from the storage room and took up a defensive position. Moments passed in eerie silence, but I remained on edge. I tried to stay as still as possible, hoping not to make a sound. Then, without warning, the beast began to slam into the doors and walls of the house, something no ordinary dog or canine would do. Every window and gate shuddered with their fury. The banging, howling, and rattling were so loud that I covered my ears. I crouched in my closet and desperately praying for it to all end. As the minutes dragged on, trapped in sheer terror, I heard a faint whistling in the distance. Gradually, the banging subsided, though the rattling and howling continued. After a while, the howling gradually faded into the distance, but it was still audible. Then, I heard a car pull up. My mom had arrived. I rushed outside, ushered her and my brother inside as quickly as I could, and explained everything that had happened earlier that evening. They thought I had a vivid imagination and that I was just really stressed out, but I still locked the doors and called the police in a panic. When the police arrived a couple of hours later, my mom started to believe my story. They discovered large dog tracks around the perimeter of the house and dents on the doors covered with scratches. But the tracks and marks didn't smell like mud or anything ordinary. Instead, they emitted a strong odor of sage incense and burning ash. Hi Daisy. This story is not my personal experience, but it actually comes from my great-grandmother. I remember when I was younger, my mother used to tell me many stories that her abuelita, her grandmother, had told her when she was young. But there's one story in particular that was quite scary. My mother's family is originally from a department in El Salvador called La Libertad. This story is from my great-grandmother's, Francisca's, experience with La Siguanaba. For those who don't know, La Siguanaba is an urban legend in Central America. She's a woman with long dark hair and large sagging breasts, sometimes depicted with a horse's face. She only targets drunk or unfaithful men. She seduces them by appearing as a beautiful woman, but then reveals her true face and scares the men to death. The story of my great-grandmother goes like this. She was having a normal day with her cousin Luisa, and they were talking about the people in the village. They mentioned how many people came to wash their clothes in the river, so they decided to go at 4 in the morning, thinking it was a good idea as they believed that by going so early, not many people would be there washing clothes. The day came and she called her cousin Luisa to come with her. They thought it was 4 in the morning, but it was actually midnight. The moon was so bright that they mistook it for the morning. As they were walking to the river, they saw a naked woman with long, sagging breasts and long dark hair washing herself in the river. My great-grandmother approached the rock close to the river to ask her a question, saying, "Doña Queta, ¿eres usted? Doña Queta, is that you?" The place was silent, and then the woman started laughing. She turned around with her hair covering her face and said to them, "Yo no soy Doña Queta, soy la Siguanaba." I am not Doña Queta, I am la Siguanaba. My great-grandmother and her cousin looked down at the woman and saw that she had chicken-like feet. The woman continued to laugh, and they both stood there in shock. Her cousin took my great-grandmother's hand and they started to run as fast as they could. The next day, her father came up to my great-grandmother, who was still traumatized by what she had seen. Her father scolded her for leaving the house at that hour, but she couldn't respond. She was too shocked to speak, so her father slapped her face to make her answer. With that slap, she was finally able to talk and told her father what happened at the river. A week went by after the incident, and my great-grandmother and her cousin went to the pueblo to get some supplies, when they heard a woman desperately crying about what had happened to her son, who was about 20 years old. He had been found dead near the same river where they had seen La Siguanaba. Hola Daisy, my name is Libby, and ever since I found your channel, I've been absolutely obsessed with your spooky aesthetic. Thank you! Listening to your subscribers' scary stories is one of my boyfriends and my favorite things to do towards the end of each night. Thank you guys so much, guys. I appreciate your guys' support. Goals, okay? Goals. The story I'm sharing today is from my boyfriend, Angel, who has given me complete permission to share it. In my opinion, it's much more intense and haunting than anything I've ever experienced. Here it goes. Angel is the oldest of 6 siblings. His mother raised them all alone and worked full-time, which meant he often had to babysit his younger siblings, sometimes even overnight. Despite being young himself, he was always very mature and responsible when it came to taking care of his brothers and sisters. Watching them for extended periods or overnight was not unusual or uncomfortable for him. He loved them very much and didn't see it as a burden. One night, when Angel was about 15 years old, he was in charge of watching his siblings while his mom worked an overnight shift. He made sure all the kids were tucked into bed and sound asleep before heading to his room to play some video games, eventually falling asleep himself. Despite his usual alertness, he had finally drifted off around 2 in the morning when he woke up to the horrifying sound of heavy breathing in his ear and a deep, raspy, unrecognizable voice whispering, "I can't breathe," over and over again. He shot up out of bed, absolutely terrified and confused, but his immediate reaction was to go check on his siblings. He ran through the halls to each one of their rooms, checking them carefully, only to find all of them sleeping peacefully and completely unharmed. He was relieved, but still couldn't get over what he had just heard. He very clearly heard someone or something say, "I can't breathe." Instead of trying to go back to sleep, Angel felt an unexplainable urge to head towards the front door of the house. he found himself walking to the living room, where he discovered the front door was open. A detail he was sure was not the case before everyone went to bed. The screen door was the only barrier between him and the pitch black night. He felt almost like he was in a trance as he approached the door and saw a tall black hooded figure. He described its facial features as resembling the ghost face mask from the movie Scream. As he faced the entity, he felt trapped in its daze, unable to look away. He sensed his energy being pulled through the door, as if the entity was draining the life out of him. The figure's mask-like features began to blur. An angel suddenly snapped back to reality. He started coughing hysterically, almost like he couldn't breathe until that moment. He was trying to catch his breath while wiping the sweat pouring down his face. His skin went completely pale from the shock and horror of what he just experienced. His 10-year-old brother walks into the living room and says, "Angel, are you okay? Why do you look so scared? You look like you just saw a ghost." Little did he know, Angel actually did. Hello, I would like to share a story my grandfather shared with us. While I believe him, I'd love to know if anyone else has heard a similar tale from their grandparents. This story dates back to when my grandfather was a child. He used to play a game called the Onion Game, late at night in town with other children. The game involved one child wrapping their arm and legs around a pole, and the other children would do the same, using the child in the front of them as a pole, holding on as tightly as they could. The last person would be the onion picker, whose job was to pull the last child away from the rest, trying to pick as many children as possible. As usual, no one wanted to be the onion picker, but one night, a child approached from down the road and volunteered to take the role if they let him join, to which the group agreed. As this new child began to pull at the last kid, the child being pulled complained, saying, "Hey, be careful with your nails, you're scratching me and it hurts." The new child tried again, and when they turned around to ask him to stop digging his nails into their waist, they were horrified to see that this was no ordinary child. He was the devil himself. The child screamed and everyone turned to see the devil. They all took off running to their homes. This happened many years ago, long before there were electric lights on poles. The only light they had to play by was a single lantern in the middle of the plaza. My grandfather, who lived miles away on a farm, ran to his uncle's house in town and spent the night there. The next morning, he hurried back home, and they never played that game at night again. So that was it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and of course thank you to everyone that wrote in their spooky stories. I seriously appreciate you guys sending in your stories, taking out the time to send a story in. I appreciate it, and obviously I love reading them, so please keep them coming. Do not be shy, do not hesitate. I will gladly read them here if you would want me to. But thank you guys so much for watching. Los quiero mucho. I hope you guys are all doing amazing, and I hope to see you guys all in my next one. Bye.